This video will be my long-term review of the Niner RLT9 RDO. I've ridden the bike for over 2 months now, from commuting to work to short gravel rides to long gravel rides, and just in the past week I've gotten in a couple really good group rides, and so I'm ready to kind of give my final thoughts of this bike. I'll wrap this whole video series up with a comprehensive review of the bike, but I'm just going to talk about some of the highlights that I've noticed for this bike over the past couple months. The main story for me with this bike is comfort. And with that comfort, you do not sacrifice very much speed at all. If you are familiar with my channel, a year or so ago, I sold my gravel bike, which was a steel RLT, and I went mainly with my cyclocross bike. After riding this bike, test riding it, I realized that this bike is so smooth and so comfortable over the gravel roads. Now, I really liked my cyclocross bike, but this bike takes comfort to a whole new level. And I'm going to use a word that I've really never used in a review of a bike, and that is, this bike is a pleasure to ride on gravel roads. I love riding gravel. I love the freedom of getting out and just planning a route and getting away from things. And I've always loved doing that, whether it's a gravel bike or a cyclocross bike. This bike takes my enjoyment of riding gravel to a whole new level. You know, I don't use that term lightly as far as a pleasure to ride. I can't say that about every bike that I've ridden, but when I get out on gravel roads on this thing, it's just so stable and so smooth that I absolutely love riding this bike. You know, as I said in my last video, the long-term or the long ride comfort video, I will choose this bike pretty much anytime I head out on gravel roads, unless I'm really specifically training for a cyclocross race or, you know, needing to use the power meter that's on my cyclocross bike. Last week, it was a night ride, and I did my first really group hammerfest on this bike. And one of the things that I did not like about the steel version of this bike was the fact that when you got in those hammer situations, punching it up climbs, trying to stay with the group, or doing a breakaway, I felt like the steel was just a little sluggish. This bike, even though it's comfortable, is incredibly fast. The power delivery to the drivetrain is phenomenal. And you know, with the flatter top tube, the flatter seat stays, the frame also has a little bit of compliance to it. And so being able to have that speed and comfort is what really makes this bike shine. Now, this is the 3-star build, and I'm not really going to go heavily into the components. But the SRAM rival on this bike has almost been flawless. With road SRAM brakes, sometimes they go out of center a little bit with me, more so than Shimano. That's really the only issue that I've had. I have force on my cyclocross bike, but the rival on this has been fine. And I'll say it again, that I think every gravel bike should be 2 front chainrings. I love having a front derailleur. You know, front derailleurs in mountain bikes are pretty much a thing of the past. On gravel bikes, I would hope that they're here to stay. And the shifting on this SRAM rival and the front derailleur has been just spot on. I've heard some people talk about the front derailleur being a little bit hard to set up. I've not noticed that on this bike. I feel like the front derailleur was really easy to set up and has just shifted flawlessly. Yesterday I did my first big gravel event on this bike. It was a 96-mile gravel ride in Ocala, Florida, called the Big Scrub Gravel Buzz. A phenomenal ride. And I put a whole video of that event on my YouTube channel if you want to check it out. I'll link it below. This bike, I'm telling you, the comfort is what really sets it apart. That ride was not that rough, but after 96 miles, every bump is rough. You know, my feet got a little sore. That's not the bike, that's the shoes and pedals. That tends to happen on long rides. The saddle, for the most part, has been good. I got a little tender spot yesterday at the end of the ride, but you know, almost 5.5 hours in the saddle, that's probably to be expected. I actually really like the Niner saddles on this bike, and it proved to be a good saddle on that ride as well. I put in 100-mile gravel rides with this saddle before and not really had an issue. But at the end of that ride, even though I was, you know, fatigued, I didn't feel beat up by the bike at all. And there were some times, just like the Hammer Fest that I did on my night ride last week, there were some times where I had to put in some power to stay in contact with the front group, or just pull through strong. And again, the power delivery was really, really good on this bike. Other than comfort, the other thing that I really appreciate about this bike, and Niner in general actually, is the specs. This bike is pretty much spec'd exactly how I would go out and spec a bike if I were going to build it from the ground up. From the Stans wheels to the SRAM Rival to the Schwalbe G1 tires, even the bar. So I talked about the handlebar, the flare, not being something that I really was excited about, but after riding this bike for 2 months, I love the flared handlebar. The position on the hoods is very natural, and when you get in the drops, it spreads your hands out a little bit further and you just feel like you have more control. You can tell that Niner is a company that's staffed by people who ride bikes because of the way they spec their bikes. They don't just throw on these weird components and weird brands. It's name brands that just really come together on this bike. I've said it before, I love Stans wheels. They perform well, they're easy to set up. No issues with flats or anything like that. I've had these set up tubeless, obviously. Really like the Schwalbe G1 tires. In fact, I think I may like, these are a little bit wider than the Schwalbe G1s that I had on my steel Niner. These are 38s. They used to put 35s. The 38s have elevated these to my favorite gravel tire. It was the Maxxis Rambler. Speaking of tires, the only slight negative of this bike, and for me it's not a negative because I wouldn't run bigger tires than this, but if you want to run bigger than 38 or 40C tires, you're not going to have a ton of tire clearance in the back. But again, for me, that's not a negative. In fact, I don't know if maybe having a slightly narrower chain stays, maybe the power delivery is better. I don't know. I'm not a bike engineer, but it's not a problem for me. But for some of you out there who want to run really fat tires, you're going to run into some clearance issues with this bike. This is a bike, after riding it for 2 months, I can fully recommend this bike to you guys out there, you girls out there who ride gravel. Even for cyclocross racing, this bike is going to do okay. It's very stable, just a little bit slacker head angle, a little bit lower bottom bracket. Is still going to be okay for cross racing if you're not hammering really tight courses and if you're not winning or losing cross races by a couple seconds. I'm not going to really go into which bike I would pick if I could only have one, the cross or the gravel. That's coming up in one of my cross versus gravel videos. But this is it's just a really phenomenal all-around bike. It's a great commuter. If you like to commute, especially if you want to put a rack on it, you're good to go. If you want to do bike packing with this bike, it's got the braze-ons for your fenders and everything. So really, that's going to wrap it up for this long-term review of the Niner RLT9. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and drop those below. And stay tuned to my channel. I'll continue a few more videos of my cross versus gravel project. And I'll wrap up this review series of the Niner with a comprehensive from start to finish review of the bike. Thanks for watching.